Hello, I'm Mr. Nightscared. I know some of you are listening with the lights off, or just letting this play somewhere in the background. If you feel like it, you can leave a comment, say where you are tonight. And if you've been here before, you already know. These stories don't really announce themselves. They just happen. Quiet decisions, small moments, things that don't seem like much at first. But something shifts. And after that, nothing sits the same anymore. So take a second, and we'll begin. Story 1. The following record concerns a family poisoning that took place in Victoria, Australia, in 2023, resulting in 3 deaths and 1 long-term survivor who required extended medical treatment due to organ failure. The meal connected to the incident had been prepared by a family member named Erin Michelle Higgins, who was also affected by the poisoning. Erin Michelle Higgins was born into a well-educated and socially respected family. Her mother was a lecturer at the University of Melbourne and was known among colleagues and students as a serious academic. Her father held director-level positions in several large Australian companies. Erin was the eldest of 2 children, and her younger sibling later became a well-known scientist in Australia. From an outside perspective, the family appeared stable, accomplished, and socially established. Erin herself was widely regarded as intelligent, although many people who knew her described her as private and often difficult to understand. Over the years, she moved between professions frequently, rarely remaining in one field for more than a few years. She worked in business-related roles, studied veterinary science, spent time in legal studies, and at one point pursued training related to air traffic and airport operations. Her longest period in any one professional track reportedly lasted around 3 years before she moved on to something else. Former colleagues from several workplaces later described her as someone who often had conflicts with co-workers. These accounts suggested that workplace relationships were frequently strained, and that she did not maintain long-term professional connections in most of the places where she worked. In 2004, while working at an animal care office affiliated with a large international organization, Erin met a civil engineer named Simon Peterson. Simon was originally from Korumburra, a town located about 15 kilometers from Erin's hometown. At the time they met, Simon held a senior position in the same organization where Erin worked. Unlike many of her co-workers, Simon reportedly developed a strong interest in her. People who knew them said they shared similar interests, particularly camping and hiking, and they often spent weekends traveling through rural and mountainous areas of Australia. Their relationship progressed steadily, and in 2005 they began dating. During this period, Erin, who had previously identified as an atheist, began attending Bible study and developed an interest in Christianity. Over time, she formally converted to Christianity. In 2007, Erin and Simon were married in a large wedding ceremony. However, one detail noted in later reports was that Erin's parents did not attend the wedding. Instead, they were reportedly traveling in Russia at the time. It was later revealed that Erin had been in a long-standing conflict with her mother, a dispute that had lasted for many years. According to Erin, the conflict dated back to her childhood, when her mother frequently criticized her weight, a subject that reportedly became a persistent source of tension between them. These details about Erin's background, personality, education, employment history, and family relationships were later compiled as part of the broader effort to understand the events that would occur many years later, when a family lunch in Victoria ended in multiple deaths caused by mushroom poisoning, and when the person who prepared the meal was also among those who fell ill. From an early age, Erin's relationship with her mother had been marked by routines that were later described as strict and deeply personal. According to Erin's own accounts, while she was still in elementary school, her mother weighed her daily and measured her waist regularly. There were also periods when her mother restricted her food intake. Over time, these experiences were said to contribute to a long-term eating disorder and a persistent lack of confidence about her body. The conflict between Erin and her mother continued into adulthood, and the distance between them remained unresolved for many years. Not long after Erin and Simon were married, Erin received an inheritance from her grandmother, who had passed away. The inheritance was reported to be approximately 2 million Australian dollars, distributed over a period of 8 years. With this financial support, Erin and Simon gradually stopped working full-time and began traveling around Australia. During this period, they purchased a house in Perth outright and also opened several small shops as additional sources of income. In 2009, their first child, a boy, was born. The birth was described as medically serious. The baby was born with a weak heartbeat, and Erin underwent a cesarean section in order to save both her life and the baby's life. During this time, Simon's parents, Don Patterson and Gail Patterson, traveled from Korumburra to Perth to support Erin and Simon. Erin's own parents did not come. Despite the medical emergency, both Erin and the baby survived. After the birth of their first child, Erin and Simon decided to move to Korumburra, Simon's hometown, at the request of Simon's parents, who believed that being closer to family would make it easier to help care for Erin and the child. They bought a house near Don and Gail Patterson's home, and over time Erin developed a closer relationship with her in-laws. In 2014, their second child, a girl, was born. With 2 children, the household appeared stable to people who lived nearby. Neighbors later described the family as harmonious and close. The children were especially close to their grandparents, Don and Gail, and often stayed overnight at their house. Don Patterson was a retired high school teacher who spent much of his retirement conducting small science experiments in his backyard with his grandchildren. Gail Patterson worked as a school office assistant and volunteered in several community organizations. After moving to Korumburra, Erin joined the Korumburra Baptist Church. Through the church, she became acquainted with a married couple named Ian and Heather Wilkinson. Ian was a pastor at the church, and Heather was Gail Patterson's sister. Although they knew Erin as Gail's daughter-in-law, Ian and Heather were not particularly close to her, and their relationship remained mostly within church settings. Despite the outward appearance of a stable family life, Erin and Simon's marriage had experienced ongoing difficulties. Reports later indicated that since the birth of their first child, the couple had frequent arguments and had, at times, lived separately within the same house. Although they reconciled for periods of time, including around the birth of their second child in 2014, the relationship continued to deteriorate. Eventually, Erin and Simon decided to separate, but they did not formally divorce. They agreed to this arrangement primarily because of their 2 children. They reached private agreements regarding financial support and custody without using lawyers. Legally, they remained husband and wife, but in practice they lived separate lives while maintaining a cooperative relationship. They continued to communicate regularly and still took trips together with their children, presenting themselves publicly as a cooperative and functional family unit, even though the marriage itself had effectively ended. The separation between Erin and Simon eventually became known to the Peterson family. Don and Gail Patterson were reportedly disappointed when they learned that their son and daughter-in-law were no longer living as a married couple. They were described as devout Christians and did not want the marriage to end in divorce. Despite this, Erin maintained a good relationship with Simon's parents. In property and asset documents she purchased over the years, she continued to include Simon's name alongside her own. In 2019, Erin's mother died of cancer. Her father had previously died of cancer in 2011. After her mother's death, Erin received another large inheritance. By this time, she was considered financially secure, with income continuing to come in from inheritance distributions and investments. After receiving this inheritance, Aaron and Simon purchased a large plot of land in Aaron's hometown of Leongatha, where Aaron planned to build what she described as her dream home. Aaron designed the house and continued to involve Simon in planning decisions. She still hoped that Simon would remain her husband and did not want him to formally divorce her. As with previous assets, Simon's name was again included on the property certificate. Although the Peterson family knew that Aaron and Simon had been separated for some time, Aaron continued to maintain polite and regular contact with Dawn and Gail. They exchanged messages and greetings on holidays and special occasions, and the relationship appeared stable on the surface. In October 2022, the relationship between Aaron and her in-laws began to deteriorate. The situation began when the Peterson family planned a surprise birthday celebration for Gail. Simon sent Aaron a text message inviting her to attend the birthday gathering at 12:30 p.m. the following day. Aaron replied that she did not know there was a celebration planned. Simon explained that the family had organized a surprise party and that his father had informed Aaron's children so they could pass the message to her. It appeared that the message had not been clearly communicated to Aaron. Aaron felt offended by the situation. She believed she had not been informed in advance and felt that she was being invited only as an afterthought. Simon asked her several times to attend, but Aaron refused, saying she felt hurt and forgotten by her in-laws and Simon's extended family. When the birthday gathering took place, Aaron did not attend. This caused tension, and Simon became angry, feeling that Aaron had disrespected his family. After this incident, Simon began to distance himself further. He formally listed his marital status as separated on his tax documents. Aaron later discovered that Simon had separated their tax status, which meant she now had to file taxes independently and recalculate her own financial reporting. After this, Aaron ended what she had described as a friendship with Simon, and communication between them became increasingly formal and strained. The situation developed into a prolonged conflict involving finances and responsibilities for their children. Aaron formally applied for child support through government channels, but the request did not result in immediate financial assistance from Simon. As a result, Aaron transferred the children from a private Christian school to a more affordable school because the tuition had previously been split between her and Simon. After their conflict escalated, Simon canceled automatic payments from his account that had been used for the children's school expenses and also stopped paying their health insurance. Aaron then raised the issue in a Peterson family group chat, asking Don and Gail to speak to Simon about his responsibilities toward the children. Despite this, Simon reportedly refused to resume paying the school fees and also refused to pay a hospital bill related to their first child. The financial dispute continued, and communication between Aaron and Simon became increasingly limited to administrative and legal matters concerning the children and shared assets. After the financial dispute and the growing distance between Aaron and Simon, Aaron also began to distance herself from Simon's parents. Communication with Don and Gail became less frequent and gradually shifted to practical matters, mostly concerning the children. Messages that had once been casual and familiar became shorter and more functional in tone. During this period, Aaron began looking for ways to occupy her time and manage stress. She joined a Facebook group that focused on criminal cases, where members discussed ongoing investigations, past cases, and legal outcomes. In that group, Aaron wrote about her personal situation, including her conflict with Simon and the financial issues related to their children. According to later records, she described Simon in negative terms and expressed frustration about her situation. At some point, an online acquaintance suggested that instead of focusing on the conflict, she should find a hobby or activity to occupy her time, suggesting activities such as gardening, growing flowers, or foraging for wild mushrooms. Erin became particularly interested in the suggestion about mushrooms. She began visiting a website used by mushroom enthusiasts and foragers, where users uploaded photographs of mushrooms and provided detailed descriptions, including names, physical characteristics, whether the mushrooms were edible or poisonous, and the locations where they could be found. Over time, Erin became interested in a species known as the death cap mushroom, one of the most poisonous mushrooms in the world. It is known that even a small amount can cause severe liver or kidney failure, leading to coma and death. The toxin in the mushroom is not destroyed by cooking, drying, freezing, or prolonged soaking. On April 28, 2023, Erin traveled to areas known as Loch and Outrim, where death cap mushrooms had previously been reported. She collected mushrooms during this trip and brought them home. During the drive back, she reportedly considered that fresh mushrooms contain a high water content and would spoil quickly if stored in that condition. On the same day, she stopped at a store and purchased a food dehydrator. After returning home, she dried the mushrooms until the moisture was removed, then ground them into a powder. In powdered form, the material could be stored for months. As time passed, Erin's relationship with Simon and with Don and Gail continued to deteriorate. Erin believed that her in-laws were taking Simon's side in the dispute, although people who knew the family later said that Don and Gail still behaved kindly toward Erin and remained concerned about her and the children. Because the family kept their conflicts private, people outside the family did not fully understand what had happened, and some were confused by the growing distance between Erin and her in-laws. Despite the tension, Erin continued attending the same church, where Ian Wilkinson served as pastor. On July 23, 2023, after a church service, Erin approached Don and Gail and invited them to her house for lunch the following Saturday. She told them she had some important news to share during the meal. Erin also invited Ian Wilkinson and his wife, Heather Wilkinson, who was Gail's sister. Ian and Heather were somewhat surprised by the invitation, as they were not particularly close to Erin. However, they assumed the invitation may have been related to family matters, or that Erin might have wanted Ian present in his role as a pastor. They accepted the invitation. Several days later, Erin went to a supermarket and purchased a number of high-quality ingredients. She planned to prepare a special meal for the lunch gathering. The main dish she intended to make was beef Wellington. Beef Wellington is a dish typically associated with formal meals and special occasions. It consists of a tender cut of beef coated with a finely chopped mushroom mixture, then wrapped in pastry and baked until the outer layer becomes crisp. The preparation process is time-consuming and requires multiple steps, and the ingredients are relatively expensive compared to everyday meals. When Erin went to the supermarket to shop for the lunch, she also purchased edible mushrooms, which were one of the standard ingredients used in the dish. The day before the lunch, Erin sent a text message to Simon, inviting him to attend the meal the following day. Simon declined the invitation. He said he no longer felt comfortable sitting at the same table with Erin due to the ongoing conflict between them, even if his parents would also be present. Erin expressed frustration in her replies, mentioning that she had already spent a significant amount of money on expensive ingredients for the meal. Simon still did not attend. On the morning of July 29, 2023, Erin drove her 14-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter, along with one of their friends, to a McDonald's restaurant and told them to go to the movies afterward so they would not be at home during the lunch. Around noon, Don and Gail Patterson arrived at Erin's house, along with Ian and Heather Wilkinson. Before the meal, Erin gave them a tour of the house, as they had not visited since the house had been completed in 2020. After the tour, they sat down and ate the beef Wellington that Erin had prepared. The meal was finished, and afterward they ate fruit that Heather had brought and an orange cake that Gail had brought. While they were eating dessert and talking, Erin told them why she had invited them to lunch. She said that she had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, the same illness that had caused the deaths of both her parents. She said she did not know where she should seek treatment and did not know how to tell her children about her illness. The atmosphere at the table changed, and the conversation became focused on Erin and her situation. The five of them joined hands and prayed together, with Ian leading the prayer. After some time, the gathering ended, and Don and Gail, along with Ian and Heather, returned to their homes. On the way home, Ian and Heather met several people from their church community and told them that they had just had lunch at Erin's house and that the food had been very good. They spoke positively about the meal and about the afternoon. Several hours later, that same evening, Don and Gail began to feel unwell. They experienced nausea, stomach pain, diarrhea, vomiting, and severe dizziness. When the symptoms became too difficult to manage, they called an ambulance and were taken to Leongatha Hospital. Simon, after hearing that his parents had suddenly been taken to the hospital, went there as well. Doctors initially believed that Don and Gail were suffering from food poisoning. They were kept under observation overnight, but by the next day, their condition had not improved and instead had begun to worsen. After spending the night at the hospital with his parents, Simon began trying to understand what had caused the sudden illness. The symptoms had appeared quickly and were severe. He decided to call Ian and Heather Wilkinson, initially to inform them that his parents were in critical condition at the hospital due to suspected food poisoning. During the call, however, Simon learned that Ian and Heather were also very ill. They told him they had been suffering from diarrhea and vomiting since the previous evening and were extremely weak. Realizing that all four people who had attended the lunch were now seriously ill, Simon drove to Ian and Heather's house the next morning and brought them to the hospital. During the drive, he asked them what they had eaten. Heather told him that she believed they had all become sick after eating the meal at Erin's house, because she had started feeling unwell later that same afternoon. She also mentioned something else she remembered from the lunch. The plates used by Don, Gail, Ian, and Heather were gray, while Erin's plate had been a different color, orange. When Ian and Heather arrived at the hospital, medical staff immediately began treatment because their condition was also critical, similar to Simon's parents. Simon, still trying to manage the situation, called Erin to inform her that his parents, Ian, and Heather had all been hospitalized. Erin told him that she was also feeling unwell and that she had not been able to attend church that morning because she was experiencing diarrhea. Because Don and Gail's condition continued to worsen, they were transferred to Dandenong Hospital in Melbourne, a larger facility with more advanced equipment. Simon traveled there to accompany them. Meanwhile, Ian and Heather remained at Leongatha Hospital in serious condition. On July 31st, 2023, 2 days after the lunch, a patient arrived at Leongatha Hospital reporting symptoms of diarrhea and vomiting. The patient was Erin Patterson. The nurse who received her began standard intake procedures. Dr. Chris Webster, who was treating Ian and Heather, became concerned when he learned that Erin had arrived with similar symptoms, since she had been present at the same meal. Erin was placed on a hospital bed in the emergency department, near where Ian and Heather were being treated. However, after only a few minutes, Erin said she needed to leave the hospital. Staff tried to convince her to stay for examination and treatment, but she insisted she had to leave to pick up her child's belongings. She signed a form acknowledging that she was leaving against medical advice, and then left the hospital. Because of the unusual situation, multiple critically ill patients connected to the same meal, and another attendee leaving the hospital before evaluation, Dr. Webster contacted the police and requested a welfare check on Erin. He reported that several patients were in intensive care with suspected mushroom poisoning, and that Erin, who had eaten the same meal, had arrived at the hospital but left after only a short time. Police went to Erin's home. About an hour later, Erin returned to the hospital, this time accompanied by police officers, and agreed to receive medical treatment. When Dr. Webster saw her, he was reportedly surprised, because Erin did not appear to be as severely ill as the other four patients. Her condition appeared stable, and she did not show the same level of distress that had been observed in the others. Because of this, doctors began asking more direct questions, including where the mushrooms used in the meal had come from. When doctors asked Erin where the mushrooms used in the beef Wellington had come from, she initially said that she had purchased dried mushrooms from an Asian grocery store somewhere in the Melbourne area. She said she could not remember which specific store because she had visited several shops that day. Dr. Chris Webster then asked whether Erin's children had eaten the beef Wellington. Erin said they had not. She explained that she had separated the mushroom mixture from their portions, and that her children had only eaten the beef and the pastry. This answer caused some concern, because if the mushrooms had been mixed into the dish during preparation, separation afterward would not necessarily prevent contamination. Dr. Webster asked whether any of the leftover food or mushrooms were still at the house. Erin said that leftovers had been thrown into a garbage bin behind her house. Police officers who were already at the house were instructed to check the trash. They found food scraps inside a brown bag, which were then sent to a laboratory for testing. At the same time, Erin's 2 children were taken to the hospital for medical examination. Laboratory tests later showed that the food scraps contained toxins consistent with death cap mushrooms. However, the mushroom pieces that were visible in the food appeared to be ordinary edible mushrooms, and not death cap mushrooms. It was not immediately clear how the death cap toxin had entered the food. After 1 day of observation, Erin and her 2 children were allowed to leave the hospital because doctors did not find signs of severe poisoning in them, although Erin continued to report mild symptoms such as stomach discomfort and nausea. On August 1, 2023, the day after Erin and the children were discharged, police continued investigating the source of the mushrooms. Officers collected samples of mushrooms from the Asian grocery stores Erin said she had visited and sent them for laboratory testing. The results showed that none of the mushrooms sold at those stores were poisonous. After Erin left the hospital, she was brought to the police station for further questioning. Officers told her that they had tested mushrooms from the stores she mentioned and had not found any poisonous varieties. They asked her again where the mushrooms had come from and whether she had collected wild mushrooms herself. Erin initially denied foraging for wild mushrooms. However, investigators had already examined mobile phone tower data and found that Erin's phone had been in the areas of Loch and Outram on April 28, 2023, locations where death cap mushrooms had previously been reported. After being confronted with this information, Erin admitted that she had gone foraging for wild mushrooms on several occasions, sometimes with her children as a leisure activity. At that time, there was still no direct evidence proving how the poison had been introduced into the meal, so Erin was allowed to return home. However, both police and medical staff had begun to suspect that Erin might have had a role in the poisoning. Doctors had already reported that death cap toxin had been detected in the food, even though visible pieces of death cap mushroom had not been found. Investigators began to consider the possibility that the mushrooms had been processed in a way that made them difficult to identify in the cooked food. Because of this possibility, police conducted another search of Erin's house. During the second search of Erin's house, investigators noticed that an item seen during the earlier search was no longer there. The missing item was a black food dehydrator, an appliance similar to a small oven used for drying food. Because the machine was no longer in the house, investigators began checking local waste disposal and recycling facilities. They eventually located a black food dehydrator at a waste disposal site. CCTV footage showed that Erin had disposed of the machine on August 2nd, shortly after she had been questioned by police and released. Forensic examination of the dehydrator found Erin's fingerprints on the machine. Traces of death cap mushroom toxin were also found on the trays inside the dehydrator. Investigators concluded that the mushrooms had likely been dried and then ground into powder, which would explain why no visible pieces of death cap mushroom had been found in the cooked food. As the investigation continued, the condition of the victims worsened. Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson both died on August 4th, several days after the lunch. Don Patterson died the following day, on August 5th. Their deaths caused widespread shock in the local community. A joint funeral was held, attended by hundreds of people. Ian Wilkinson remained in intensive care and later underwent a liver transplant. He survived and was discharged from the hospital in mid-September. Following these developments, police obtained another search warrant for Aaron's house. During this search, they seized several items, including leftover food containers, electronic devices such as mobile phones, a tablet and a computer, SIM cards, CCTV recordings, bank records, and shopping receipts. When investigators examined Aaron's phones, they found that one of the devices had been reset to factory settings 3 times before it was handed over to police. Later, that same phone was remotely reset again. This raised further suspicion among investigators. From the seized electronic devices, investigators recovered browsing history from a website used by mushroom enthusiasts and foragers. The records showed searches and page visits related specifically to death cap mushrooms, including information about identification, toxicity, and locations where the mushrooms could be found. Because Aaron had previously told police that she sometimes went mushroom foraging with her 2 children, the children were interviewed. They told investigators that they had never gone mushroom foraging with their mother and were not aware that she had any such hobby. Simon Peterson was also interviewed again. He told investigators that he had become suspicious of Aaron and that he believed she was responsible for the deaths of his parents and his aunt, and for the poisoning of Ian Wilkinson following the lunch at her house. In the course of the investigation, Simon told police that the July 2023 poisoning was not the first time he had become seriously ill after eating food prepared by Aaron. He described 3 earlier incidents. The first occurred in November 2021, when Simon became severely ill after eating a pasta meal Aaron had prepared and packed in a lunch container. The second incident occurred in May 2022 during a camping trip in the mountains, when Simon became ill again after eating chicken curry prepared by Aaron. According to his account, his condition during that second incident was extremely serious, and he was hospitalized and reportedly fell into a coma for several weeks before recovering. A third incident occurred in September 2022, when Simon again became ill after eating vegetables prepared by Aaron. Laboratory testing later found that the food contained barium carbonate, a chemical compound commonly used in rat poison. After these incidents, Simon began distancing himself from Aaron and avoided meeting her in person. His decisions to separate finances, stop joint tax filing, and limit direct contact were later described by him as precautionary measures because he feared for his safety. He said that when Aaron invited him to the July 2023 lunch, he refused because he believed he might be the intended target. However, Simon did not share these suspicions with his parents or other relatives. He later said that he wanted to preserve Aaron's relationship with his parents and did not expect that they would be harmed. He believed that if there were any attempt, he would be the only target, which was why he chose not to attend the lunch. Based on the physical evidence, digital records, forensic findings, and witness statements, Aaron was arrested at her home on November 2, 2023. After being formally charged, she sold several of her assets in order to fund her legal defense and hired a prominent lawyer to represent her. On April 19, 2025, Aaron's trial began. She was charged with 3 counts of premeditated murder and multiple counts of attempted murder, including the poisoning of Ian Wilkinson and the earlier poisoning incidents involving Simon. During the trial, Aaron pleaded not guilty. She stated that the deaths had been the result of a mistake, suggesting that she may have accidentally included poisonous mushrooms in the meal. She also maintained that the purpose of the lunch had been to tell the family that she had been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. However, during the trial, evidence was presented showing that in May 2023, about 2 months before the lunch, Aaron had conducted internet searches related to ovarian cancer, including symptoms, physical signs, and disease progression. Prosecutors argued that this indicated she had fabricated the illness in advance as part of a plan to explain the lunch invitation. Erin later admitted that she did not actually have cancer. She claimed that she had planned to undergo a cosmetic fat removal procedure and did not want to explain the recovery process to people, so she intended to say she had cancer instead. However, further investigation showed that the clinic she mentioned did not perform the procedure she described and had no record of any appointment scheduled under her name. Prosecutors argued that the lunch invitation had been arranged specifically to bring Don and Gail Patterson, along with Ian and Heather Wilkinson, to the house. Although Erin did not admit to intentionally poisoning them and did not clearly state a motive, investigators believed the primary target had originally been Simon, and that the others were also poisoned because of the ongoing family conflict and the deteriorating relationship between Erin and Simon. On September 29, 2025, the court delivered its verdict. Erin was found guilty of 3 counts of premeditated murder and 1 count of attempted murder against Ian Wilkinson. The attempted murder charges related to Simon were not upheld due to insufficient evidence. Erin was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 33 years before she would be eligible to apply for parole. Story 2. The following account is assembled from procedural records, witness statements, and later forensic review. The sequence of information follows the order in which details became known. On the night of May 26, 2001, the police department in Shinyong received a telephone call from a man whose voice appeared unsteady. He reported that a killing had taken place in his village and that 2 people were dead. Before ending the call, he provided the full address. The location was in Shaoshan Village, within the jurisdiction of Shinyong City, Hunan Province, China. Police officers traveled to the village that same night. The area was relatively remote, surrounded by low mountains and stretches of forest. The house where the incident occurred stood apart from other homes, with the nearest neighboring house located approximately 500 meters away. The layout of the property was somewhat unusual. The main structure consisted of 3 sections, a central living room with 2 bedrooms on either side. The kitchen and bathroom were in separate structures outside the main building, and the property included a wide yard surrounding the house. The first victim identified at the scene was a man named Chin Shubbing, approximately 40 years old. He was found lying face down on a bed. One of his arms hung loosely toward the floor. His body was covered by a blanket marked with numerous dark red stains. The room where he was found showed no visible signs of struggle. The bedding was in place, and objects in the room appeared undisturbed. There were no indications that items had been moved or that a confrontation had occurred in that room. The condition of the scene suggested that the attack happened while he was asleep and that it occurred suddenly. The second victim was identified as Chai Chin Mei, 35 years old, the wife of Chin Shubbing. She was found in a different bedroom. The condition of this room was notably different from the first. There were clear signs of a struggle. Items were out of place, and the room showed evidence of a physical confrontation. Chai Chin Mei was found lying on the floor near the bed. Her body showed multiple injuries. Her head was turned slightly toward a dressing table, and her clothing was disordered, consistent with signs of a struggle having taken place before her death. At that time, the couple had a child who was no longer living with them. The separation between the child and the parents would later become a central part of the case, though this was not immediately understood during the initial investigation. 17 years passed before certain identities connected to the case were re-examined. During that later period, police began to suspect that a person known as Chongshir might in fact be the missing child, believed for years to be someone else. To verify this possibility, investigators collected a blood sample from Chongshir and conducted a DNA test. The sample was compared again with preserved biological evidence taken from the original murder victims. The test was conducted to determine whether the surviving child of the murdered couple had, unknowingly, been living under a different identity for many years. By the time the DNA testing process was initiated, both parents had already been dead for 17 years, and the house in Shaoshan village had long since fallen quiet. When the child eventually returned to the village, there was no home to return to, only the graves of the two people who had been killed on that night in May 2001. At the foot of the bed, investigators found a black pillow stained with blood. Nearby were small fragments of bricks scattered across the floor, along with debris that appeared to have fallen from the wall. The room where Chai Chin-mei was found showed extensive signs of disturbance. Furniture had been knocked over, and many items were out of place, indicating a violent struggle had taken place in that room. According to the forensic report, the cause of death was determined to be severe head trauma caused by a hard object, consistent with repeated blows from a brick. Several bricks were found in the corner of the room with dried blood on their surfaces, and these were later identified as the murder weapons. Investigators estimated that the victims were killed approximately 6 hours after their last meal, placing the time of death between 11 p.m. and midnight on May 25, 2001. Near the body of Chen Shubing, police found an acupuncture needle. This detail drew attention during the investigation because neither Chen Shubing nor Chai Chin may had any known medical training or acupuncture knowledge. The presence of the needle suggested that it may have been left behind by another person who had been in the house. On the dining table, investigators also found several plates with leftover food and 2 glasses containing alcoholic drinks. This detail was considered unusual because Chai Chin-mei was known not to drink alcohol. The presence of 2 glasses suggested that Chen Shubing may have been drinking with someone else earlier that evening, and that the person was likely known to the couple and had been received as a guest. While the police were still processing the scene, Chen Shubing's younger brother, Chen Shuyu, arrived and reported that his nephew, Chen Xiaofeng, the 20-month-old son of Chen Shubing and Chai Chin-mei, was missing from the house. The couple had 2 children. Their first child, a daughter who was still in elementary school, survived because she had been staying at a relative's house on the night of the incident. The younger child, Chen Xiaofeng, had been in the house and could not be found. Following this report, the investigation expanded to include a search for the missing child, while officers also continued to examine possible motives for the killings. The location of the Chen family home, which stood at a distance from other houses, meant that the family lived somewhat privately. They were known to spend most of their time tending their yard and managing their household, rather than visiting frequently with neighbors. Despite this, people who knew them described the couple as gentle and kind. There were no known conflicts with others, and no known debts that might suggest a financial motive. Because of this, the deaths of Chen Shubing and Chai Chin may remain difficult to explain for those who knew them. Although the couple lived quietly, they were known to be generous. At one point, they had allowed a traveling acupuncture practitioner to stay at their home. According to a statement later given by Chen Shuyu, the younger brother of Chen Shubing, this acupuncture practitioner had visited the house several times and had provided treatment to Chen Shubing approximately 3 or 4 days before the killings. The man was described as being around 40 years old. The acupuncture practitioner had been living in Chen Shubing's home for a period of time before the incident. Chen Shubing himself had introduced the man to relatives and to several villagers under the name Dr. Changlan, explaining that he would help treat joint and bone pain using acupuncture. Because the Chen house was located some distance away from the center of the village, most villagers rarely saw Dr. Changlan moving around the area, and few people had regular contact with him. In the early stage of the investigation, police focused their attention on this man and identified him as the primary suspect. Investigators began collecting fingerprints from the crime scene and comparing them with available records, but they were unable to obtain clear matches belonging to the suspect. At the same time, officers interviewed villagers and anyone who had seen or interacted with the man known as Chonglon. From these interviews, police assembled a general physical description. The man was believed to be around 40 years old, with a thin and small build, approximately 160 to 165 centimeters tall. His face was described as oval-shaped, with high cheekbones, small eyes, thick eyebrows, a slightly protruding chin, and a somewhat hunched posture. Witnesses also noted that he spoke with an accent associated with northern regions and frequently used expressions common in Hebei province. Based on these descriptions, police brought in specialists to produce a facial sketch. When the sketch was completed and shown to villagers who had met Chonglon, several of them stated that the drawing closely resembled the man who had been staying at the Chen household. The sketch was then distributed across cities, rural areas, and border checkpoints as part of a wider search effort. Approximately 2 weeks after the murders, the first new lead emerged. A three-wheeled vehicle driver from a neighboring town, located about 15 kilometers from the crime scene, reported that on the morning of Saturday, May 26th, he had seen a thin, small-built man who closely resembled the sketch. The man was walking quickly while carrying a small child asleep on his shoulder. The driver remembered the moment clearly because the weather that morning had been quite cold, yet the child was dressed in very thin clothing. This report strengthened the belief that the man seen by the driver was the same person known as Chonglon, and that the child he was carrying was likely Chen Xiaofeng. After this sighting, police continued searching for further information about the suspect, while also continuing efforts to locate the missing child. Both investigators and members of the Chen family maintained the belief that the child had not been killed, but had instead been taken away. There was a shared assumption that if the child had been taken and raised elsewhere, then one day his identity might be discovered and he could be brought back. However, the case proved extremely difficult to solve, and for a long time there were no significant breakthroughs. In February 2006, nearly 5 years after the incident, police received a report from a citizen who claimed to have seen an acupuncture practitioner with the surname Chong in Hebei province. The man reportedly had physical characteristics that closely matched the description of the suspect who had been sought in connection with the Shinyong murders. Following this report, police began the process of verifying the identity of this man. Police later confirmed that the acupuncture practitioner reported in Hebei province had not left the province at the time of the murders. His travel records and local documentation showed no movement that would place him near Shinyong during the period in question, and he was eventually removed from the suspect list. In the years that followed, police continued to receive reports from members of the public who believed they had seen a man resembling the suspect. Each report was examined, and in some cases investigators traveled to verify the information in person. None of these reports produced a confirmed identification. Over time, the trail grew faint, and the suspect appeared to have disappeared without leaving a clear trace. 17 years passed without resolution. By early 2018, the case remained unsolved, and the missing child, Chen Xiaofeng, had never been located. In the middle of 2018, an investigator proposed a different approach to the search. Based on the timeline, Chen Xiaofeng would have been approximately 19 years old in that year. The idea was based on the fact that hospital and civil records were periodically updated and that DNA databases had expanded significantly over the years. Investigators began reviewing records and conducting DNA comparisons involving young men of similar age within Hunan province. On May 26, 2018, the family of the victims agreed to a new step in the investigation. With their permission, the graves of Chen Shubing and Chai Chin Mei were opened so that DNA samples could be collected from their skeletal remains. These samples were then entered into the National DNA Database. DNA records from hospitals and local registries were also gathered and compared against the newly entered profiles. During this process, investigators found a match. The DNA of a young man named Chong Shi, born in 1999, matched the biological data of Qin Shubing and Chai Chin Mei. Background checks showed that Chong Shi's family history was unclear and contained gaps that could not be easily explained. Further investigation revealed that Chong Shi was living in Sangqing County, Hunan Province, approximately 200 kilometers from the Chen family's former home. He was living with an elderly woman. Police officers visited the residence to ask questions and gather information. According to the elderly woman, her son, Chong Nan, had brought the child home in 2001 when the boy was about 2 years old. Chong Nan told his mother that the child was the result of a relationship he had with a woman and that he needed someone to care for the child. He reportedly said that if a relative who had no children wanted to adopt the boy, he would allow it, but if not, he would raise the child himself. In 2004, Chong Nan reportedly considered giving the child to another family. However, the elderly woman refused. She said she wanted to keep the boy and raise him as her own grandson. Investigators noted that the time when Chong Nan first brought the child home was very close to the time when Qin Xiaofeng had disappeared in 2001. This timing increased suspicion that Chong Shi might in fact be the missing child. To confirm this, police collected a blood sample from Chong Shi and conducted another DNA comparison with the samples taken from the remains of Qin Shubing and Chai Chin Mei. The results confirmed that Chong Shi was Qin Xiaofeng, the child who had disappeared 17 years earlier on the night his parents were killed. This discovery answered the question of what had happened to the missing child, but it did not immediately answer another question that had remained since the beginning of the case. Investigators still needed to determine whether the child had been taken and raised by the same man who had killed his parents, or whether the child had been passed to another household after the murders without the adoptive family knowing the origin of the child. When officers visited the home where Qin Xiaofeng had been living, they observed that he and the elderly woman who raised him were living in poor conditions, and that their daily life appeared modest and difficult. After the identification was confirmed, it was learned that Xiaofeng had grown up in modest circumstances. He worked while continuing his studies in order to support himself and the elderly woman who had raised him. At times, living expenses were supplemented by his aunt, the younger sister of Chong Nan. Further investigation revealed that Chong Nan had been in prison since 2005. He had been convicted in a separate case involving the abduction of 5 women with mental disabilities. At the time Chong Nan was imprisoned, Chong Shi, who was later confirmed to be Qin Xiaofeng, was 6 years old. Chong Nan was initially sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2008, the sentence was reduced to 18 years. After another appeal, the sentence was reduced again to 15 years, and he was expected to be released in 2020. When investigators met Chong Nan, they noticed that his appearance closely resembled the facial sketch that had been created years earlier. His Hebei accent was also clearly noticeable. During questioning, Chong Nan explained that he had developed the accent after traveling repeatedly to Hebei province, where he had attended acupuncture training. As the investigation continued, the connection between Chong Nan and the earlier suspect known as the acupuncture practitioner became clearer. After repeated questioning, Chong Nan eventually confessed to his involvement in the murders. He stated that before the killings, he had intentionally changed his name to Chong Nan. His original name was Chong Chin. In 2001, he met Qin Shubing at a restaurant while trying to promote his acupuncture services. At that time, he was living a transient life and did not have a stable income. According to his statement, Qin Shubing saw that he appeared poor and hungry and paid for his meal. During that meeting, Qin Shubing spoke openly about his family and mentioned that he had children. After this meeting, Chong Chin introduced himself under the name Dr. Chong Lan and did not reveal his real identity. As a gesture of gratitude for the meal, he offered to provide acupuncture treatment for Chen Shubing free of charge. Chen Shubing accepted the offer and invited him to his home. After the treatment, Chen Shubing appeared satisfied with the results and allowed the man known as Chong Lan to stay at the house for several days. In his statement, Chong Chin said that the Chen family treated him with kindness during the days he stayed in their home. When villagers needed acupuncture treatment, Chen Shubing and Chai Chin Mei would recommend him, and over time he became a familiar presence in the household. He said that he spent time with the family, ate with them, and was treated as a guest who did not need to leave immediately. During this period, he became particularly attached to the couple's young son, Chen Xiaofeng, who was 20 months old at the time. He later stated that he had never married and had no children, and that he began to think about taking the child and raising him himself. According to his confession, this idea developed gradually while he was staying in the house. On the evening before the murders, after dinner, he invited Chen Shubing to drink alcohol with him. He stated that he repeatedly encouraged Chen Shubing to continue drinking. Later, he offered to give him acupuncture treatment before sleep. Chen Shubing agreed, and they went to the room where Chong was staying, which was located in a separate structure from the main bedroom area. Chong stated that when Chen Shubing lay face down, he did not take out acupuncture needles, but instead used a knife he had taken from the kitchen and attacked him. Because Chen Shubing was lying face down and had been drinking, he was unable to resist. After that, Chong went to the main bedroom where Chai Chin Mei was sleeping with the child. According to the statement, Chai Chin Mei woke up when he tried to take the child. A struggle followed. During this confrontation, he used a brick from inside the room and struck her multiple times, causing fatal head injuries. After the killings, he took Chen Xiaofeng and left the house during the night, carrying the child as he fled the area. In the period that followed, he changed his name more than once. He first used the name Chong Kai Chin, and later used the name Chong Nan. In 2005, he was arrested in connection with another case involving the abduction of several women with mental disabilities. He was imprisoned for that crime. Years later, after Chen Xiaofeng was identified through DNA testing and the earlier murder case was reopened, Chong Nan was tried again for the planned murder of Chen Shubing and Chai Chin Mei and for the abduction of Chen Xiaofeng. In 2018, he was sentenced to death for those crimes. By that time, Chen Xiaofeng had already been living for many years under the name Chong Shi. The man he had believed to be his father was identified by investigators as the person responsible for the deaths of his biological parents. Records noted that the information caused him severe emotional distress when he learned the full history of the case. For most of his life, he had lived without knowing the identity of his biological parents or the circumstances under which he had been taken from them. From early childhood, he had been told by people around him that his mother had left when he was still a baby, and that his father had raised him alone for a period of time before he was left in the care of his grandmother. This was the explanation he grew up with, and for many years he did not question it. He later learned that his biological parents had been killed on the night he disappeared, and that the man he had believed to be his father was responsible for their deaths. After receiving this information, records indicate that he experienced severe psychological shock. Police arranged for psychological counseling to help him process the information and adjust to the new understanding of his identity and past. Although he could not accept the actions of the man who had raised him, he continued to show concern and respect for the elderly woman who had cared for him since he was very young. She had raised him through difficult circumstances, and he continued to regard her as family. At the same time, he decided to return to his biological family and reconnect with them. He refused to visit Chong Nan in prison. When he met his biological family, the reunion was recorded as highly emotional. His older sister, who had survived because she had not been in the house on the night of the murders, embraced him and cried for a long time. For 17 years, the family had continued searching for him without knowing whether he was alive. After the reunion, he and his family visited the graves of his parents. They burned incense and held a memorial. He also returned to the house where he had lived as a baby. After 17 years of abandonment, the house had largely fallen into ruin. Parts of the structure had collapsed, and the property was overgrown. Some old furniture remained inside, including the wooden cradle where he had slept as an infant. Following the resolution of the case, donations were collected from local authorities and private individuals to support his education and help him continue his life. Story 3. The account begins with a threat spoken in anger, directed at a frightened child named Nihua. Hua Ying reportedly warned her to remain quiet, telling her that if she continued crying she would be thrown from the window. Out of fear, Nihua complied and followed what Hua Ying demanded. Years earlier, during the 1990s, the story of the Yang family had begun in Shenzhen County, Guizhou Province, China, where they were known among neighbors as a notably content household. The family consisted of the father, Yang Shengmin, the mother, Xiong Mieni, and their 2 daughters. Their eldest child was named Yang Shangying, while their younger daughter, born 3 years after her sister, was named Yang Nyu Hua. By local standards, the Yang family was often regarded as one of the happiest families in their village. Yang Shengmin was known to indulge his daughters in ways uncommon for the area at the time, frequently bringing them new clothing and toys, while also making sure the household was stocked with snacks and fruit that the children could eat whenever they pleased. In a rural community where many families struggled to secure enough food for daily meals, such comfort stood out. When returning from work, the father often brought home fried chicken, especially the drumsticks his daughters favored, and the family's life in the village was remembered as calm, stable, and affectionate. As time passed, Yang Shengmin began to think seriously about improving their circumstances. He hoped to provide his family with a better future and had developed plans to renovate the home where they were living. Realizing that this would require more money than could easily be earned in the village, he decided that he should seek employment in a larger city. He did not want to leave his wife and daughters behind, and when he discussed the matter with Xiong Mieni, she agreed with the plan. She further suggested that she work as well, believing that if both of them found employment their savings would accumulate more quickly. Around 1994, the family relocated from their village to the city of Giang in Guizhou Province. Upon arriving, they rented a modest room, small and simple, but large enough to house all 4 of them together. In time, both parents secured jobs. Because their work often kept them away for long periods, the couple became increasingly concerned about leaving their daughters alone. Their rented home was located near a railway station in a crowded and disorderly neighborhood, and they feared the children could easily become lost or be taken if they wandered too far. In response, Yang Shengmin made deliberate efforts to prepare his daughters for the possibility of separation or danger. He instructed them to memorize their own full names, the names of their parents, and each other's names as well. He also made certain they learned the name of the area where they lived, believing that if they ever became lost, this knowledge might help them find assistance or return home. Only after he was satisfied that both girls understood these details did the family settle into the rhythm of their new life, and for a time their daily routines continued as normal. While both parents worked from morning until late afternoon, daily responsibility inside the home often fell to the children themselves. At the time, Yang Shangying was 8 years old and attended primary school, while her younger sister, Niehua, was 5 and had not yet begun formal education. Because of this arrangement, Niehua would remain alone in the rented room during the hours her sister was away at school, and once Xiangying returned in the afternoon, the two girls would stay together and look after one another until their parents came home from work. During the winter of 1995, another young family moved into the room beside the Yang's residence. They were known as the Gong family and consisted of the father, Gong Xiangliang, the mother, Yu Huaying, and their 10-year-old daughter. By outward appearance, the family seemed warm and approachable, and neighbors regarded them as friendly, polite, and generous people. Huaying in particular was remembered for being especially kind toward Xiangying and Niehua, and over time the two families became familiar with one another. The children frequently played together, and Huaying often visited the Yang family's room to borrow household items, asking for chopsticks, bowls, plates, and other everyday necessities. When she returned borrowed items, she commonly brought small offerings in return, including food, fruit, or pastries. These repeated exchanges gradually established a sense of comfort and trust between the households. One afternoon, after Xiangying had returned home from school and was staying in the room with Niehua as usual while their parents remained at work, Huaying came to visit. She reportedly asked Niehua what kind of gift she would like to receive. The child remembered seeing neighbors in her former village knitting sweaters from wool by hand, and so she answered that she wanted knitting needles. Huaying then offered to take her to the market to buy them. Before Niehua left, Xiangying objected and tried to stop her sister from going. Although the Gong family lived next door, they had only known them for a short time, and Xiangying believed their parents would not approve of the girls leaving with someone they had only recently met. Huaying reassured her, saying they would only be gone briefly, and that Niehua would be brought back soon afterward. With that assurance, the two departed together that afternoon. As the hours passed, evening began to approach, yet neither Huaying nor Niehua returned. Eventually the girls' parents arrived home from work before they did, and when they asked where Niehua was, Xiangying explained that Huaying had taken her out earlier in the day. Though the Yang parents knew their neighbors, concern quickly overtook them, as the outing had lasted far longer than expected and night was beginning to fall. They immediately went next door to speak with Gong Xiangliang and his daughter, only to discover that neither of them was there. The neighboring room was empty. Unsure who to ask or where to begin, Yang Shengmin and Xiong Mianyi left at once to search for their daughter. Elsewhere, after taking Niehua away from the residence, Huaying had brought the child to a train station. From there, the two boarded a train bound for the city of Handan in Hebei province, a journey of roughly 1,800 kilometers that would take approximately 17 hours to complete. During the journey, Niehua gradually became frightened as it became clear that she was being taken far from home to unfamiliar places, and once the train departed she began crying and shouting that she wanted to return to her family. Huaying, who until then had maintained the appearance of kindness, reportedly changed in demeanor. According to later accounts, she tore the sweater Niehua was wearing and threw it out through the train window. She then threatened the child, warning her to remain silent and telling her that if she cried again she would be thrown from the train as well. Terrified by the threat, Niehua stopped resisting and complied with Huaying's demands for the remainder of the trip. After nearly 20 hours of travel, they arrived in Handan, a city in Hebei province, where Huaying temporarily stayed at the home of a man identified as Wang Mofu, described as a friend of hers. During the time they remained there, Huaying repeatedly contacted prospective buyers in an effort to place Niehua with another family. According to reports, she encountered difficulty finding someone willing to take the child, largely because Niehua was a girl. At the time, in many parts of China, long-standing cultural preference for sons remained deeply influential, and male children were often viewed as the ones who would continue the family line. Combined with the effects of the country's one-child policy, this created circumstances in which some families who wanted sons but did not have one sought illegal alternatives. During the 1980s through the early 2000s, child trafficking had become increasingly widespread in certain regions, and weak coordination between provincial household registration systems allowed abducted children to be moved across long distances, renamed, and absorbed into other communities with little immediate detection. As the days passed and Huang remained unable to quickly arrange a transaction, her frustration reportedly grew. The longer Niehua remained with her, the more money Huang had to spend on food and basic care, and witnesses later stated that she became increasingly resentful toward the child. In an effort to reduce expenses, Huang allegedly stopped feeding Niehua properly. The child was also left in the thin clothing she had worn from the day she was taken, and was not provided a coat, despite the winter weather and despite the fact that her sweater had been destroyed during the train ride. After several days, Huang eventually located a family willing to take Niehua. They were identified as the Li family, consisting of a mother and her son. An agreement was made, and Huang transferred the child to them in exchange for 2,500 yuan, an amount roughly equivalent at the time to 625,000 Indonesian rupiah. Niehua, still too young to understand fully what was happening, followed along with little comprehension of the exchange taking place around her. When she resisted being left behind, Huang told her that she would return in a few days to retrieve her. Niehua waited, but Huang never came back. It was only after living with this new household that Niehua gradually came to understand she had not simply been taken on a trip or left temporarily with strangers, but had in fact been sold by the neighbor she had trusted. After arriving in the Li household, Niehua was given a new identity and renamed Li Suyin. The family she had been placed with lived in difficult circumstances. The household consisted primarily of an older woman, around 50 years of age, and her adult son, who was approximately 30 and was both deaf and mute. They lived in poverty, and much of the family's concerns centered on the son's future. Because of his disability and advancing age, the mother had struggled to find anyone willing to marry him. According to later accounts, she had formed the idea of raising a young girl in the household and eventually arranging for her to marry her son once she became an adult, believing this would ensure someone remained to care for him later in life. It was for this reason that she had agreed to take Niehua. Life inside the home quickly became difficult for the child. Although the older woman had paid to obtain her, she reportedly resented the expense involved, particularly because the money used in the transaction had originally been saved for her son's future marriage. Rather than treating Niehua with affection, she viewed the child as someone who would need to repay what had been spent. From the age of 5 onward, Niehua was allegedly forced into constant labor inside the household. She was made to wash clothes, clean dishes, prepare food, and assist with farm work despite her young age. The older woman reportedly pressured her relentlessly, insisting she mature quickly, so that one day she could work hard enough to compensate for the money that had been used to bring her there. When Niehua made mistakes, even minor ones, she was beaten, sometimes with a cane. Because she was not regarded as a true member of the family, she was treated with little sympathy. For years, Niehua lived under sustained physical and emotional hardship, enduring conditions that began when she was still only a small child. At night, she often thought of the family she had lost. She remembered fragments of her earlier life with clarity then, being carried by her father, being fed fried chicken by him, and playing beside her older sister in the home they once shared. Yet as the years passed, those memories slowly began to fade. Eventually, she found that she could no longer clearly remember the faces of her parents or her sister. What remained most firmly in her mind were names. She still remembered her father's full name and her sister's full name, though even her mother's full name had gradually slipped from memory. The pressure of her circumstances forced her to mature quickly, and over time she developed a determination to escape the life she had been given. She studied diligently, believing education might provide a path out of poverty and suffering. Her academic performance reflected that effort, and she became known as one of the strongest students in her class, regularly earning the highest marks among her peers. In 2001, while Nyahua was in the 6th grade, the older woman in the household became seriously ill. Despite the years of mistreatment she had endured, Nyahua voluntarily took on the responsibility of caring for her each day and attended to her with patience and diligence throughout the illness. In time, the older woman recovered from her illness. After she regained her strength, several neighbors came to visit the home, and during one such visit she happened to take money from her room and hand it to Nyahua so the girl could pay her school expenses. The gesture drew attention from those present, and one of the visitors remarked that Nyahua was said to be exceptionally bright, noting that she regularly ranked first in her class. The older woman confirmed this, explaining that the girl consistently earned top marks each year. Another neighbor then reportedly responded with a warning. She remarked that intelligent children often became successful adults, and that if Nyahua succeeded in life she might eventually leave and never return to the household. The neighbor suggested that continuing her education would only increase the likelihood that she would abandon them in the future, and advised that she be removed from school instead. Whether motivated by envy or suspicion, the comment had a lasting effect. The older woman became persuaded by what she had heard, and after Nyahua completed primary school, she was forbidden from continuing on to middle school. Her education ended there. With no further schooling permitted, Nyahua remained at home with little to occupy her time. She began accompanying her adoptive father, the deaf and mute son of the household, whenever he left the house. The two were often seen traveling together by bicycle or motorbike, and before long local gossip began to develop around them. Neighbors who had already involved themselves in her life now began spreading rumors about the nature of their relationship. Some mocked Nyahua openly, referring to her as the younger wife of the man she had supposedly been bought for, and they ridiculed her whenever she passed their homes. The comments caused her deep embarrassment, and over time she became increasingly reluctant to leave the house, ashamed of the constant public humiliation. Eventually, one neighboring resident who sympathized with Nyahua's circumstances, having watched her endure abuse, be denied education, and become the target of ridicule, offered a practical suggestion. The woman proposed that instead of remaining idle at home, Nyahua should be sent to work. The older woman agreed readily, seeing it as an opportunity for Nyahua to begin repaying the money that had once been spent to obtain her. At the age of 13, Nyahua began working in an ice cream factory. Her monthly wages amounted to approximately 270 yuan, a modest sum at the time, but despite the low pay she felt some satisfaction in earning money and being able to hand her wages over to the older woman in the household. As she grew older, however, the gossip surrounding her worsened rather than faded. The repeated insinuations that she was being raised to become her adoptive father's wife continued to follow her, and the humiliation of hearing such things became increasingly difficult to bear. By 2005, when Nyahua was 15 years old, she began pressing her adoptive grandmother for permission to leave and work in another city. She explained that she could no longer endure the cruelty of the neighbors and wanted to escape the environment entirely. At first, the older woman refused. She remained wary of allowing Nyahua to leave, still influenced by the earlier warnings that if the girl ever gained independence, she might choose never to return. Several of the older woman's relatives eventually encouraged her to reconsider, arguing that Nyahua should be allowed to seek employment elsewhere. After continued discussion, she relented, and Nyahua was permitted to leave for work outside the area. She later secured a job at a factory in the city of Suzhou, Jiangsu Province, marking the first time she had lived at a meaningful distance from the household where she had spent most of her life. At some point while living there, Niehua happened to watch a television program featuring individuals searching for long-lost relatives through a reality-based reunion show. Seeing others attempt to reconnect with missing family members stirred memories she had carried since childhood, and for the first time in years, she seriously considered trying to locate her own family. She briefly thought about applying to the program herself, but the filming location was far away, and the distance involved made the effort seem impractical, so she abandoned the idea. Amid those uncertain years, Niehua met a man who cared for her sincerely, and in 2009 the two were married. Their marriage proved stable, and together they built a family of their own, eventually raising 3 children. By outward appearance, Niehua had achieved a life far more peaceful than the one she had known growing up, yet the question of her missing family never left her mind. As she became older, her desire to discover what had happened to them only deepened. With her husband's support, she submitted her blood type information and DNA sample to a volunteer organization that assisted in locating missing persons and reconnecting separated families. Despite this effort, no immediate match was found, and the search produced no answers. Over time, her need for closure became stronger, and she continued looking for new ways to pursue the search. She noticed that on various social media platforms, many people had managed to reconnect with lost relatives after sharing their stories online and receiving assistance from strangers. Encouraged by those examples, Niehua began posting childhood photographs of herself and asking internet users for help in identifying her origins. Her early attempts gained little traction, but she continued posting repeatedly, determined not to stop. Eventually, she decided to record herself speaking directly on camera. In the video, she described what little she remembered about her biological family, recounted the day she had been taken by her neighbor, and spoke openly about the hardship she had endured while growing up in the household that purchased her. The video spread widely online and drew significant public attention. In 2021, one viewer who saw the video reached out to her with an unexpected message. The individual claimed to believe he might be her cousin. He explained that his family had long spoken of a female relative who had been abducted at the age of 5 and never found, and although he himself had been born after the disappearance, he had grown up hearing the story repeatedly from relatives and felt that Niehua's account closely matched what he had been told. The man then provided contact information for a woman named Yang Sangying, the older sister of the missing child in his family. When Niehua and Yang Sangying spoke and compared their memories, names, and family details, it quickly became clear that the connection was genuine. After 26 years without contact, Niehua had finally located her sister once again. After the initial joy of reconnecting with her sister, Niehua asked the question she had carried with her for decades. She wanted to know about their parents, hoping at last to hear how they had lived and whether they were still waiting for her. It was then that Yang Sangying told her the news she had never expected to receive. Both of their parents had died many years earlier. According to Sangying, their deaths came after years of profound emotional decline following Niehua's disappearance. She explained that on the day Niehua was taken, their parents had immediately gone out searching for her when she failed to return home. When they could not find her themselves, they contacted police and a formal search was launched. Despite those efforts, no trace of Niehua was located. Authorities were also unable to track the neighboring Gong family, who had vanished after the abduction. In the aftermath, the family's life changed entirely. Niehua's parents stopped working and devoted themselves almost completely to searching for their missing daughter. Day after day, Yang Shengmin, Xiong Mieni, and Yang Sangying went together to train stations and bus terminals carrying blankets with them, spending long hours searching crowds in hopes of spotting Niehua among travelers. At times they even remained overnight in those places, waiting in case she somehow returned on her own. But each search ended the same way, with the family returning home empty-handed. 6 months after the abduction, both parents had reportedly fallen into severe despair. Their father, once remembered as cheerful and determined to provide for his family, began drinking heavily every day and gradually stopped eating properly. His grief altered his behavior so deeply that he reportedly grew suspicious of nearly everyone around him, believing strangers might be kidnappers. He became known for wandering the streets at night while intoxicated, shouting Niehua's name repeatedly into the darkness. Their mother's mental state also deteriorated. Sangying recalled that she often behaved as though Niehua were still living in the house. At mealtimes she would prepare an extra bowl of rice and place chopsticks beside it for her missing daughter, telling Sangying to save food because Niehua would soon return home. Some nights she would leave the house alone after midnight, climb into the nearby hills while crying, and call out for Niehua in the dark. For Sangying, who was still only a child herself, nightly life became filled with the sound of her parents weeping. The home she had once known as warm and joyful had become defined by grief. Then, in 1997, tragedy struck again. One evening her father was crying as he often did, lying beneath a blanket with his head covered. Sangying, who was around 10 years old at the time, tried to comfort him and urged him to stop crying, but he continued through the night. When the family woke the next morning, he had died in the same position where he had last been seen. An autopsy later determined that he had died from gastric bleeding caused by prolonged heavy alcohol consumption. He was 39 years old. 2 years later, in 1999, Niehua's mother also died. According to the family, her health had steadily declined under the weight of prolonged depression and emotional trauma. She was only 32 years old when she passed away. After the death of both parents, young Sangying was left orphaned at only 12 years old and was taken in by relatives. According to later accounts, her life there was not easy. Rather than being comforted, she was blamed by some family members for what had happened, accused of failing to protect her younger sister and of indirectly causing the grief that led to their parents' deaths. She was reportedly called unlucky and made to carry that stigma throughout much of her youth. Then, on May 15, 2021, after more than 2.5 decades away, Niehua returned to the village where she had once lived with her family. When she arrived, she was met by her sister, and the two embraced in tears, overwhelmed by the reality that they had found one another again after 26 years of separation. Together they later visited the graves of their parents, where they wept again, mourning the reunion that had come too late for the people they had most wanted to see. Following their reunion, Niehua and Sangying decided to formally reopen the events surrounding the abduction that had taken place 26 years earlier. They went to police and filed a report, with Niehua recounting everything she remembered, including the full name of the woman she identified as her abductor, Yu Huaying. Police began investigating the case immediately. By that time, China's population registration systems had become far more integrated than they had been in the 1990s, allowing authorities to track individuals more efficiently across provinces. Using those records, investigators were able to locate Hua Ying's whereabouts. As the investigation proceeded, Niehua traveled back to Handan to find Wang Mo Fu, the elderly man who had allowed Hua Ying and Niehua to stay at his home when they first arrived in the city years earlier. Now around 90 years old, Wang Mo Fu initially did not want to become involved, reportedly fearing legal consequences or retaliation. However, Niehua pleaded with him, asking him to testify for the sake of the parents who had died without ever seeing their daughter again. Eventually he agreed. Elsewhere, police detained 3 suspects connected to the case. The primary suspect was Yu Huaying, who was 55 years old at the time of her arrest. Also taken into custody were her legal husband, Wang Chiawon, and her partner Gong Xianliang. Investigators later determined that when Huaying had moved in beside the Yang family years earlier, Gong Xianliang had been falsely presented as her husband. In reality, he was her romantic partner, while Hua Ying's actual husband, Wang Chiawon, was living elsewhere at the time. The 10-year-old girl introduced as Hua Ying's daughter was reportedly Gong Xianliang's biological child. Authorities came to believe the three were involved together, not only in a complicated personal relationship, but in coordinated criminal activity. Police gathered documentary evidence and interviewed multiple witnesses as the investigation continued. Once the evidence had been assembled, formal trial proceedings on kidnapping charges began on July 14, 2023. During the trial, Niehua testified that Huaying had posed as a trusted neighbor, abducted her under false pretenses, and delivered her to another family in exchange for money. She further stated that Huaying had physically abused her during the period immediately following the abduction. Huaying denied the accusations and contested Niehua's testimony. However, Wang Mofu took the stand and supported Niehua's account. He testified that while Huaying and the child stayed in his home, he personally observed Huaying mistreating Niehua. He stated that Huaying frequently abused the child and at times refused to feed her while waiting to secure a buyer. As the investigation continued, authorities concluded that Niehua had not been the only victim connected to the group. Evidence presented in court indicated that Yu Huaying, together with Wang Chiawon and Gong Xianliang, had been involved in the abduction and sale of multiple children over a period of years. In total, investigators linked the group to 17 kidnapped children who were allegedly sold to other families. Among the most disturbing findings was the allegation that the earliest victim in the group's trafficking activities had been Hua Ying's own biological son, a child from her marriage to Wang Chiawon. Prosecutors stated that in 1993, the couple sold the boy to another family for 6,000 yuan, a considerable amount of money at the time. Authorities argued that the profit from that sale encouraged them to continue, eventually leading to repeated kidnappings and trafficking operations involving other children. During proceedings, Huaying initially claimed that she had participated in the crimes only because she had been pressured by her husband and by Gong Xianliang. Both men rejected that version of events and instead asserted that Huaying had been the central organizer behind the kidnappings, describing her as the primary planner in the operation. Hearing those statements in court, Niehua reportedly watched Huaying closely throughout the proceedings, overcome with anger as testimony unfolded. In addition to the criminal case, Niehua filed a civil claim seeking 8.8 million yuan in damages. The filing cited compensation for the deaths of her parents, emotional suffering, and lost earnings over the course of her life. According to reports, those close to the matter believed Niehua understood Huaying was unlikely ever to pay such an amount, but the lawsuit reflected not only financial damages, it also represented her desire for acknowledgement and remorse from the woman she held responsible. Even so, throughout the proceedings, Huaying reportedly never offered an apology and showed no visible remorse toward Niehua. Roughly 2 months after the first hearing, final proceedings concluded and sentencing was delivered. The court found Yu Huaying, Wang Chiawon, and Gong Xianliang guilty on all charges presented. Yu Huaying was sentenced to death. She later appealed the ruling and continued to maintain that she was innocent, but the appeal was rejected, and the death sentence was upheld by higher judicial authorities. Wang Chiawon and Gong Xianliang were each sentenced to life imprisonment for their roles in participating in the trafficking conspiracy alongside Huaying. As last reported, Huaying, now in her late 50s, remains in custody awaiting execution of her sentence. Meanwhile, Yang Sangying and Yang Ni Hua have remained reunited, continuing to spend time together and visiting their maternal grandmother, who is still alive and living in the family's original home village at around 90 years of age. Story 4. Not long afterward, Huang fell into a coma, and his body became severely swollen as fluid accumulated throughout his limbs and organs. Medical complications had begun to develop at once, including kidney failure, liver failure, and a weakening heart. For a time, those around him continued to hope he might survive. Yet while concern gathered around his condition, another person involved in the matter appeared to be holding on to resentment that had not faded. In the weeks that followed, a tragic incident unfolded inside a university dormitory, and after remaining under medical care for more than 2 weeks, the victim was pronounced dead. What had begun quietly inside one of China's most prestigious academic institutions would later become known as a case shaped by rivalry, pressure, and hostility between 2 exceptionally accomplished young doctors. The case centers on a man named Lin Sinhao, who was born on June 27, 1986, on the outskirts of Shantou in Guangdong Province, China. He was the third of 5 children in his family, with 2 older sisters and 2 younger siblings, 1 sister and 1 brother. His family lived with limited means throughout his childhood. His father had once worked in a textile factory, while his mother earned money collecting scrap materials, though the family's circumstances worsened after the factory closed and his father lost his position. Because his father also suffered from heart disease and was no longer physically able to continue working, the family attempted to support themselves by operating a small roadside shop. As the eldest son in the household, and because he had shown unusual academic ability from a young age, Lin became the child upon whom much of the family's hope was placed. His parents believed that if anyone in the family might eventually improve their financial situation, it would be him. He studied diligently throughout his school years, and after years of strong academic performance, he earned admission to Sun Yat-sen University, one of China's leading public universities, located in Guangzhou. After completing his undergraduate education there, Lin's academic performance was considered strong enough that the university recommended him for postgraduate study at Fudan University in Shanghai, an institution widely regarded as one of the most prestigious and competitive universities in the country. When his parents learned of the recommendation, they were said to be deeply proud, believing that the future they had hoped for was slowly beginning to take shape. In 2011, Lin officially enrolled at Fudan University as a graduate student. His field of study was medical imaging and radiology, and among his peers he became known for his technical skill with diagnostic imaging equipment, including ultrasound and MRI systems. Because his home was far from Shanghai, he lived in campus housing and was assigned to room 421 on the 4th floor of one of the university dormitory buildings. During his postgraduate years, Lin developed a reputation for being almost entirely focused on study. When he was not attending lectures, he spent most of his time either in the library or inside laboratory facilities. He also worked part-time as a tutor for undergraduate students, using whatever spare time remained in his schedule to earn additional money. Much of what he earned was reportedly sent home to support his parents. Those who knew him during that period described him as extremely frugal. Lin was aware of his family's financial hardship and spent with unusual caution, often avoiding even minor expenses whenever possible. He did not socialize in cafes, rarely ate at restaurants, and almost never purchased new clothing, choosing instead to live as modestly as he could while continuing his studies. Through years of careful saving, Lin Sinhao was able not only to support himself, but also to help pay for the education of his two younger siblings while contributing to his parents' household expenses back home. During his time at the university, much of his attention remained fixed on academic work. He spent long hours conducting experiments in laboratory settings and became known for publishing advanced research papers related to his findings and observations. Records later noted that Lin had authored 8 scientific papers that were approved by the university for publication, an unusually strong academic record for a student at his stage of study. Alongside his academic work, Lin also served as vice chairman of the student union. During his time in that role, fellow students described him as reserved, quiet, and somewhat emotionally distant, though they also noted that he was attentive to practical matters and often helped other students without being asked. He was regarded as someone who noticed small problems quickly and took initiative in resolving issues around campus, often without seeking recognition. After moving into the dormitory in 2011, Lin shared room 421 with 2 other graduate students, one of whom was Huang Yang, along with another roommate named Gu Jianqi. Huang Yang was also a medical student. He came from Zhejiang County in Sichuan Province, China, and had been born on July 17, 1985. Like Lin, Huang had grown up in a family of limited financial means. Huang was his parents' only child. His father had once worked for a state-owned company, and after retirement had taken employment as a dormitory caretaker at a secondary school. His mother reportedly suffered from several chronic illnesses, including gallstones and other ongoing medical conditions. Because the family lacked financial security, Huang's mother was said to have delayed her own treatment in order to save money for her son's education. As their only child, Huang represented the full weight of his parents' hopes for the future. From an early age, Huang had shown exceptional academic ability. He consistently ranked at the top of his classes and regularly graduated with the highest marks among his peers. Motivated in part by watching his mother's prolonged health struggles, he chose to pursue medicine during his undergraduate studies, hoping eventually to become a doctor himself. He was later accepted into Fudan University for postgraduate study. Unlike Lin, whose admission had come with recommendation and scholarship support, Huang reportedly entered through examination performance alone, having achieved the highest score among applicants who tested alongside him. Admission to the university was widely regarded as highly competitive, and his result further reinforced his reputation as an exceptionally gifted student. During his graduate studies, Huang specialized in otolaryngology, the medical field concerning the ear, nose, and throat. Like many students, he also worked part-time while completing his coursework. Despite similarities in their backgrounds, Huang's financial circumstances during university differed somewhat from Lin's. Although his family was not wealthy, his parents did not require him to send money home, and because they had no other children to support, they reportedly insisted that he keep what he earned for himself. They even continued sending him financial support while he studied. As a result, Huang was able to live with noticeably greater comfort than Lin. While Lin remained highly restrictive with his spending, Huang was known to use his money more freely, spending time with friends, visiting cafes, going to movies, dining at restaurants, treating classmates to meals, and purchasing branded items. Huang was also able to save a considerable amount of money, enough to help cover the cost of a surgical procedure for his mother, which reportedly totaled 300,000 yuan. While Lin Senheo had built a reputation around laboratory research and academic publication, Huang's strengths were expressed somewhat differently. Though widely regarded as highly intelligent, Huang reportedly had little interest in conducting laboratory experiments and did not involve himself in research publication during his graduate years. He never published scientific journals of his own, and his academic talents, while respected, were not seen as having the same visible influence on the wider student body. Lin, by contrast, had become someone many classmates turned to when they needed help understanding coursework or experimental procedures. His academic involvement placed him in a more active mentoring role among students, and this distinction between the two men was noticed by those around them. Their third roommate, Gu Jianqi, spent comparatively little time in the dormitory. Because he was originally from Shanghai, he frequently returned to his family home rather than staying overnight on campus. As a result, although all three occupied room 421 together, Gu was less involved in daily dormitory life, and Lin and Huang naturally spent more time in each other's company. Even so, the three remained on friendly terms and spoke regularly whenever they were together. In early 2013, only a few weeks before graduation, both Lin and Huang were approached by university officials and offered the opportunity to continue into doctoral study at Fudan University. The university had identified both men as particularly promising students and viewed them as strong candidates for further academic advancement. Huang reportedly accepted the offer with enthusiasm. For him, the opportunity aligned directly with his long-term ambition of becoming an ear, nose, and throat specialist with doctoral qualifications, and he saw the offer as a continuation of the path he had already intended to follow. Lin, however, declined. Although the university was prepared to cover the educational costs, Lin had begun thinking more practically about the time required for additional study. The longer he remained in school, the longer he would have to wait before entering full-time medical work, and for Lin, the purpose of his education had always been tied closely to financial necessity. His priority had never been academic prestige for its own sake, but rather reaching stable employment as quickly as possible so that he could better support his parents and siblings. Because of this, he reluctantly turned down the doctoral offer. University staff reportedly felt it would be unfortunate to lose someone of Lin's academic ability, and in response they helped arrange employment for him instead. Lin was offered a position as an ultrasonography physician at Zhongshan Hospital in Shanghai, a teaching hospital affiliated with Fudan University. In February 2013, he formally began working there as an ultrasound doctor, marking the beginning of the medical career he had worked toward for years. Those around him believed he had a promising future ahead. Reports from colleagues and patients described Lin as highly dedicated to his work and consistently kind in his treatment of those under his care. Some patients later recalled instances in which Lin had quietly given them money to buy food after learning they had arrived at the hospital without having eaten. There were also reports that certain patients, aware of Lin's modest personal circumstances and difficult background, had attempted to offer him tips in return for his kindness or care. Lin reportedly refused such offers, despite the fact that he himself lived modestly and remained in need of money. Even after obtaining professional employment, he continued to be known for the same frugality and restraint that had defined his years as a student. By most accounts, Lin maintained that same quiet generosity with nearly everyone he encountered. Each day he traveled to the hospital for work, then returned to the dormitory to rest afterward, continuing to live in campus housing even after beginning his medical position. From time to time, he also returned to the university itself to complete remaining administrative matters connected to his graduation and employment transition. Although Lin and Huang lived in the same room, those who knew them observed that their personalities were markedly different, and the contrast between them often led to tension. Lin was generally described as introverted, reserved, and not especially talkative. He kept much of his thoughts to himself, though he remained attentive to the needs of others and was known for helping friends in small, practical ways. People recalled that when staying at a friend's home, he would sometimes clean the bathroom without being asked or fill household water containers simply because he noticed they needed doing. He did these things quietly and, according to those around him, never mentioned them afterward or sought recognition for them. Huang's personality was often described in nearly opposite terms. He was more outgoing, highly talkative, and known for speaking openly and impulsively. Friends characterized him as confident, sometimes boastful, and prone to speaking bluntly without much restraint. Though he also came from modest beginnings, Huang reportedly carried himself in a way that projected confidence and status. He often treated friends to meals, enjoyed social outings, attended gatherings, and was viewed by some as carrying himself with a degree of arrogance. One of the traits people most frequently noted about Huang was his tendency to speak without filtering his thoughts. He often made remarks without considering how they might affect others, and several acquaintances later stated that his comments could leave people feeling uncomfortable or insulted. According to those familiar with the dormitory dynamic, the person most frequently on the receiving end of Huang's sarcasm was Lin. Huang would reportedly make cutting remarks about him in front of classmates and mutual friends, mocking Lin for being stingy, for having little money, for dressing poorly, for coming from a rural background, and for not knowing how to enjoy life. Huang appeared not to fully understand, or perhaps did not consider, that Lin's extreme frugality stemmed from his obligation to support his family, while Huang himself spent freely and continued receiving financial support from home. Outwardly, Lin usually appeared unbothered by the remarks. He rarely argued and generally responded with silence, which may have led Huang to believe the comments did not affect him. Yet those close to the situation later suggested that Lin likely internalized much of what was said. Having grown up in poverty and already carrying insecurities about his background, the repeated humiliation appears to have affected him more deeply than he outwardly showed. The tension between them was not limited to words alone. Lin's demanding schedule required him to spend much of his free time studying or conducting research, habits he had maintained throughout his academic career. Because of this, he often woke earlier than others and stayed awake later into the night working at his desk. Huang reportedly grew irritated by this routine, particularly because the desk lamp Lin used for late-night study disturbed him while he was trying to sleep. Over time, even these small daily habits became another source of friction inside room 421, and the atmosphere between the two men reportedly became increasingly strained. There were several occasions when Lin would be studying quietly late at night, only for Huang to walk over and switch off his desk lamp without warning. Lin generally chose not to argue. He disliked confrontation and rarely responded directly when tensions arose. But Huang's increasingly domineering behavior gradually became another source of resentment. To Lin, it suggested not only irritation but a complete lack of respect. The main room lights would already be turned off, and only the dim glow of his desk lamp remained while he worked. Yet even that seemed enough to provoke complaint. For the time being, Lin endured it in silence. Another dispute developed over something comparatively minor, though it would later be remembered as one more sign of the deteriorating relationship between the roommates. One day, when their third roommate Gu Jinchi happened to be present in the dormitory, Huang suggested that the three of them begin sharing the cost of replacement water jugs for the room's dispenser. Each dorm room was equipped with a dispenser and refillable bottled water, though students were responsible for paying for replacement jugs themselves. Up to that point, Huang had apparently been the one purchasing them. Lin objected to the arrangement. He argued that splitting the cost evenly between all three was unfair, saying Huang drank the majority of the water, while Gu was rarely present in the dormitory at all. Lin also stated that he himself seldom drank from the room's supply because he typically used water dispensers located elsewhere on campus, including in the library, laboratory, and classrooms. During the same discussion, Lin also raised a separate concern involving a refrigerator Gu kept in the room. Lin believed the appliance increased their electricity bill and requested that Gu contribute an additional 30 yuan each month toward utilities. Gu reportedly accepted the request without much complaint. He was generally known for remaining neutral in conflicts between his roommates and often attempted to act as a moderating presence when disagreements arose. He also understood Lin's sensitivity regarding money, knowing how carefully Lin saved and how much of his income was being sent home to support his family. Huang, however, reacted differently. He reportedly became irritated, viewing Lin's complaints as further evidence that Lin was excessively stingy and overly concerned with money. Frustrated, Huang told him that if he refused to contribute toward the water, then he should stop drinking from it altogether. From that point forward, Lin reportedly stopped using the dormitory's water supply entirely. Instead, he began carrying a bottle with him and refilling it elsewhere on campus, relying on dispensers in the library, laboratories, and lecture halls rather than using the water in his own room. As time passed, the conflict between Lin and Huang continued to worsen. Gu remained unwilling to take sides, though by then the atmosphere in room 421 had reportedly become deeply uncomfortable. Lin and Huang had largely stopped speaking to one another except when necessary, and the room settled into a persistent silence broken only by occasional tension that neither openly addressed. At one point, another incident further deepened Lin's resentment. According to later accounts, Huang had developed a habit of laughing from his bed whenever Lin brushed his teeth, though at first Lin did not understand why. It was only later, after hearing from mutual acquaintances, that Lin reportedly learned Huang had told others he had used Lin's toothbrush to scrub the dormitory toilet as a joke. Whether Huang intended the claim seriously or as an exaggerated attempt at humor, the statement circulated among others and reached Lin, leaving him humiliated and further embittered by the continuing treatment he received inside the dormitory. By April 2013, the strained atmosphere inside room 421 would give way to the event that ultimately drew national attention across China. On the morning in question, Huang woke and noticed that Lin was still asleep. This struck him as unusual, as Lin was generally known for waking earlier than anyone else in the room. Their third roommate, Gu Jianqi, had not returned to the dormitory for several days, having recently married, and so at that time only Lin and Huang were staying in the room. After getting up, Huang took a glass and poured himself water from the room's dispenser. When he drank from it, however, he immediately spat it back out. He later said the water tasted bitter and carried an unusual smell. The bottle had only been purchased around 2 weeks earlier, but believing the water may simply have gone stale from sitting too long, Huang removed the jug, emptied its contents, and washed it out in the bathroom. Around that same time, Lin suddenly woke after receiving a phone call from a friend asking him to come to the hospital. According to accounts, Lin left the dormitory immediately, without showering or washing up first, and departed in a hurry. Approximately an hour later, Huang went to the library. While there, he reportedly began feeling unwell. His body temperature started rising, and he soon developed nausea severe enough that he vomited inside the library itself. Concerned by the sudden symptoms, Huang contacted 2 friends and asked them to take him to the hospital. Lin happened to be working there that day. When Huang arrived, Lin reportedly asked emergency staff to attend to him promptly. Huang's friends suggested that an ultrasound be performed to examine his stomach, and because Lin was the physician on duty in the imaging department, he carried out the scan himself. According to later recollections, after completing the ultrasound, Lin remarked that Huang's liver appeared normal and showed no obvious problems. This comment would later draw attention, as Huang's friends had reportedly asked for his stomach to be examined rather than his liver, and Lin's mention of that specific organ would later be viewed differently in hindsight. After the examination and intravenous treatment, the attending emergency physician permitted Huang to return home. At around 6 o'clock that evening, Huang went back to the dormitory to rest. But over the next several hours, rather than improving, his condition worsened sharply. That same night, friends brought him back to the hospital, where emergency physicians began a series of further examinations. The results quickly showed that something severe was happening internally. His platelet count had dropped dramatically, his lungs were beginning to stiffen, and medical staff found that his liver had already sustained damage estimated at nearly 50%. This caused confusion among the treating physicians, particularly given that earlier examinations had reportedly shown no visible liver abnormalities. Doctors began testing for a wide range of possible causes. They screened for viral infections, bacterial illness, hepatitis, and other known medical explanations, yet all available tests returned negative. No immediate diagnosis could explain the speed or severity of Huang's physical decline. When Huang's parents received word of his condition, they rushed from their home city to Shanghai. Upon arriving at the hospital and hearing the doctors describe how serious the situation had become, Huang's parents were reportedly overcome with shock, and his mother collapsed after learning the extent of his deterioration. As the days passed, Huang's condition continued to deteriorate, and the medical team increasingly suspected that he had been poisoned. Even so, they remained unable to determine what substance might be responsible. Whatever had entered his system appeared to be spreading rapidly and was causing multiple organs to fail in succession. Doctors conducted numerous toxicology screenings in an effort to identify the source. Tests were performed for various known poisons, including toxic mushrooms, cyanide, arsenic, and other common substances associated with acute poisoning, yet none of the results matched Huang's symptoms or produced a clear explanation. Without knowing the source of the poisoning, physicians could do little beyond treating the visible symptoms and attempting to slow the damage being done to his body. In the following days, Huang's condition worsened to the point that he could no longer breathe adequately on his own, and doctors placed him on respiratory support. On April 6, 2013, he suffered severe nosebleeds, and his level of consciousness began to decline. By then, the damage to his internal organs had progressed significantly, and the pain he experienced reportedly caused him to thrash violently in distress. Medical staff eventually restrained and sedated him in order to keep him calm while treatment continued. Not long afterward, Huang fell into a coma. His entire body became swollen as fluid accumulated throughout his tissues, the result of worsening kidney failure, liver failure, and declining cardiac function. Even at that stage, neither the doctors, nor the police, nor Huang's family fully understood what had caused his sudden collapse. Until shortly before becoming ill, Huang had reportedly been in good health. Amid the confusion and panic surrounding the case, Huang's father briefly went to room 421 to rest while spending time near the hospital. Lin was present there at the time, and the two reportedly spoke together. According to later accounts, Lin told Huang's father that he felt saddened by what had happened and showed him some of Huang's personal belongings kept in the room. He also stated that he and Huang had been close friends. Then on April 8, 2013, their roommate Gu Jianqi received an unexpected text message from an unknown number. The message reportedly read, "Do you remember that Lin once researched NDMA? You should ask police to test Huang for it." The message had been sent by another student living in a nearby dormitory who had grown suspicious after hearing that Huang's liver was the organ suffering the most severe damage. After receiving the message, Gu began reviewing Lin's published academic work and found that one of Lin's 8 scientific papers had indeed involved research related to NDMA. NDMA, or N-nitrosodimethylamine, is a highly toxic chemical compound that Lin had previously studied in laboratory experiments involving test animals such as rats. One of his research papers reportedly discussed the effects of NDMA contamination and noted its severe toxicity to the liver, including its ability to cause fatal hepatic damage. Alarmed by the possibility, Gu contacted police and relayed the suspicion. He also urged medical staff to test Huang specifically for NDMA exposure, believing it might explain the otherwise mysterious pattern of liver-centered organ failure that had left doctors unable to identify the cause. When the requested toxicology analysis was completed, doctors confirmed that Huang had indeed been exposed to NDMA. With that result in hand, police moved quickly to investigate Lin Sinhao's possible involvement. Investigators reviewed security footage from the university dormitory and found video showing Lin entering the dormitory building on March 31, 2013, at approximately 5 o'clock in the afternoon, carrying a yellow plastic bag. Later, he was seen leaving again with the same bag, which he then discarded. Authorities suspected the bag had contained the poison. Police next turned their attention to the university laboratory where Lin had conducted research. The lab stored NDMA for experimental purposes, and when staff inspected its inventory, they discovered that approximately 57 milliliters of the chemical were missing from one container. There was no record indicating where the missing amount had gone or for what purpose it had been used. Investigators concluded that Lin had likely taken the substance from the laboratory on a Sunday when the facility was relatively empty and less closely monitored. They then began tracing how Huang had ingested the contaminant. By the time officers arrived at room 421, the water jug itself had already been emptied and cleaned by Huang earlier that morning after he noticed the strange taste. However, a small amount of residual water remained inside the dispenser mechanism. Investigators collected samples from what was left and submitted them for testing. Laboratory analysis showed that the water contained more than 30 milliliters of NDMA contamination. Toxicology experts later stated that only a fraction of that amount, roughly 3 milliliters, could be sufficient to kill a human being, meaning the concentration placed into the dispenser far exceeded what would ordinarily be considered lethal. Further evidence emerged when police examined Lin's computer. They reportedly found internet search records showing that he had researched topics including how NDMA poisoning is detected in the human body, symptoms of NDMA poisoning in humans, whether NDMA could still be identified in water after several days, and what criminal penalties applied in China for poisoning another person. Based on this evidence, Lin Sinhao was arrested on April 11, 2013. At first, he denied the allegations and refused to confess. However, investigators considered the evidence against him too substantial to dispute, and Lin ultimately admitted his involvement during questioning. Meanwhile, Huang Yang remained hospitalized but never recovered. After an extended struggle for survival, he was pronounced dead on April 16, 2013. By the time doctors learned the true cause of his poisoning, 11 days had already passed since the exposure, and medical staff concluded that intervention had come too late. Once Huang had fallen into a coma, the damage to his organs had already become severe and largely irreversible. According to investigators, the motive stemmed from resentment that had accumulated in Lin over roughly 2 years. During questioning, it was established that Lin had grown increasingly bitter over repeated insults, humiliation, and mistreatment from Huang, whose arrogance and behavior had long caused friction between them. One of the final incidents believed to have intensified that resentment occurred on March 30, 2013. That day, Lin, Huang, and several classmates were gathered together in a classroom shortly before April 1st, during the period when students were discussing plans for April Fool's Day. Huang reportedly mentioned that he intended to prank others the following day as part of the occasion. Around that time, one of Lin's close friends entered the room, and Huang used the opportunity to test one of his jokes by deliberately lying to the friend as part of what he described as practice for April Fool's Day. The friend believed the false statement, and those present laughed after realizing he had been tricked, turning the moment into a joke among the group. Lin later stated that he had been angered by seeing his friend embarrassed during that classroom incident. According to his account, while watching Huang joke at another person's expense, he thought to himself that before Huang pranked someone else, perhaps Huang should be pranked first. At some point afterward, Lin recalled a well-known poisoning case from 1995 involving Tsinghua University in Beijing, in which a student named Zhu Ling had been poisoned and left permanently disabled, while the perpetrator was never conclusively identified. Investigators later stated that Lin referenced this case during questioning and admitted that it influenced his thinking. The following day, while the campus laboratory was quiet and classes were not in session, Lin went to the lab and used a syringe to remove approximately 57 milliliters of NDMA. He placed the substance into a yellow plastic bag and carried it back to the dormitory. Once there, according to his confession, he poured around 30 milliliters into the dormitory water dispenser that Huang frequently used, then discarded the remainder. The next morning, Huang drank from the dispenser while Lin was present in the room. Investigators later believed that Lin had only pretended to be asleep while observing Huang consume the contaminated water. After Huang became ill and was hospitalized, Lin conducted a number of internet searches related to NDMA poisoning and its detectability. During questioning, he reportedly explained that these searches were not performed because he lacked knowledge of the substance, but rather because he wanted reassurance and was attempting to calm his thoughts. According to his own statements, he believed doctors would not identify the poison because NDMA was not widely recognized outside specialized research settings and was less familiar to most physicians than substances such as cyanide or arsenic. He apparently believed the poisoning would remain unexplained, much like the earlier university poisoning case he had recalled. During trial proceedings, Lin claimed that his decision to poison Huang stemmed from frustration that had built over 2 years, his dislike of Huang's personality, and what he described as an intention to play an April Fool's prank. He stated that he had only wanted Huang to feel temporarily unwell, so that Huang would be unable to prank other students, and he insisted he had not intended for Huang to die. Prosecutors rejected that explanation. They argued that the available evidence strongly suggested the poisoning was motivated primarily by personal resentment rather than humor. Prosecutors pointed to Lin's long history of conflict with Huang, the repeated insults Lin had reportedly endured, and the possibility that Lin also harbored resentment over differences in their futures, including Huang's acceptance into doctoral study, while Lin had declined further education because of financial obligations. Authorities believed Lin may have felt bitterness not only over Huang's treatment of him, but also over Huang's opportunities. The prosecution also argued that Lin's academic background made his claim of harmless intent implausible. Because Lin had personally researched NDMA extensively and had published scientific work involving the compound, they maintained that he fully understood its toxic properties. He knew the substance could cause catastrophic liver damage and death in sufficient doses. Toxicology testimony established that approximately 3 milliliters could be lethal to a person, yet Lin had introduced around 30 milliliters into the water supply, roughly 10 times that amount. To prosecutors, this quantity made it difficult to accept the argument that the poisoning had been intended merely as a prank or temporary act of revenge. Prosecutors further argued that Lin's conduct after the poisoning undermined his claim that he had never intended serious harm. During the period when Huang was critically ill in the hospital, Lin reportedly visited him 3 separate times. Witnesses later stated that during those visits he largely stood in silence, watching as Huang's condition worsened. To the prosecution, this behavior carried particular weight. They argued that if Lin truly had not meant to kill Huang, he could have informed doctors immediately that NDMA poisoning was involved, allowing medical staff to identify the cause much sooner and potentially giving Huang a greater chance of survival. Instead, Lin remained silent while physicians struggled for days to determine what had happened. Investigators also pointed to Lin's internet searches regarding detection methods and toxicology, suggesting that his concern appeared focused less on Huang's survival and more on whether the poison could be discovered. Additional testimony indicated that Lin had watched Huang's symptoms with apparent curiosity, later leading some to believe he was observing whether the effects on a human matched those he had previously documented during laboratory experiments on animals. In February 2014, the court sentenced Lin Sinheo to death after finding him guilty of the premeditated murder of his roommate. The sentence shocked Lin's family, who had once believed he was on the path toward a highly successful future in medicine and academia. In response, his parents appealed the ruling. Support for Lin did not come only from his relatives. A group of 177 students from Fudan University signed a petition requesting that the court reduce his punishment to life imprisonment rather than execution. Among those who supported the petition were reportedly some students who had themselves experienced Huang's insults or had negative feelings toward him based on past interactions. Those advocating for leniency argued that Lin had been an exceptionally gifted student who committed a terrible act during a moment of grave personal failure, but that his life still held value and that he could potentially be rehabilitated through education and reflection. Some specifically argued that his intelligence and academic promise should not be discarded through execution. Despite those appeals, the courts declined to alter the sentence. In December 2015, China's higher court upheld the conviction in full, affirming both the murder verdict and the death sentence previously imposed on Lin Sinheo. On December 11, 2015, Lin Sinheo was formally executed. That's all of them. If you've made it this far, you're still here. Still in your room, wherever that is. The night hasn't really changed. It just feels a little different now. Anyway, I'll leave you to it.